As the Harper government plans to enter the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade negotiations, Canada's supply management system could be on the chopping block. We say could be. That's the quota system to protect dairy, poultry, and egg farmers in Canada. It's been around for 40 years. But as you heard in our interview with Deborah Coyne, analysts from all sides are saying the program may have run its course. Well, that doesn't sit too well with the dairy farmers who are mounting a passionate defense of supply management. Ron Versteeg is a spokesperson and a vice president for the Dairy Farmers of Canada, and he's a dairy farmer himself. I think that's the most important thing, and he joins me now in the studio. And here comes this discussion, as we were just talking before we came in. It sort of ramps up every now and again, but we're now seeing editorials and columnists, pundits, I confess I'm one of them, suggesting that it's time to move away from supply management. Before we get into the ins and outs of that, let me ask you about this Trans-Pacific Partnership that the Prime Minister has said Canada didn't agree to anything to get in there, but we really don't know a lot about it, and certainly some of the other countries we're negotiating with, they want access to our market. What do you think, what sort of thoughts do you have about this new trade negotiations?
Well, Canada has been a party to several trade negotiations and some large ones like NAFTA and CUSTA before it. Mm-hmm. And Canada's always been able to negotiate and conclude those negotiations without giving up supply management. And we've had repeated assurances from the government that they will continue to do that, and we fully expect they'll follow that pattern.
So far, so good. And we heard a lot of agricultural groups, they were enthusiastic about the TPP. Mm-hmm. One of the things, Deborah Coyne says, it's time to move away. We had Martha Hall Finley on the program last week, and she had a paper out with Jack Mintz about this. And her argument is, well, it's not taking away from you in order to, you being a dairy farmer, in order to improve trade. There's a way to win-win. In other words, she points out, here's New Zealand, a relatively small country with something like 30% of world export in dairy products. That seems to me to be a compelling reason for dairy farmers to say, really, there's other people that want to buy Canadian milk and Canadian dairy products. Why don't we explore how we can do more exports? Wouldn't that be a compelling reason to maybe fine-tune our system? Well,
in reality, if you're going to use New Zealand as the example, okay. I mean, they have a farmer-owned co-op that does the processing, and they have a virtual monopoly, like 90 or 95% of the market share there. And that, it's somewhat akin to a state trading enterprise. Of course, they'll deny that. And at the same time, it very much controls production in New Zealand, much the way the quota system here in Canada does. So if you want to, as a farmer, produce more milk, you have to buy more shares in the co-op. And they don't give them away. They're not cheap.
And that's essentially what happens in this situation. You have an amount that you're allowed to produce, and if you want to produce more, then you have to negotiate with another farmer or with...
And really, those two systems are somewhat similar, again, despite New Zealand's denials. And they are very much akin to what's known in other manufacturing industries as just-in-time inventory control. So you produce what's required, no more, no less. And this criticism about we restrict production, we don't restrict production. We produce exactly what's needed. And in Canada, I'm proud to say that we consume double the global average consumption of milk and dairy products. So it's not like we're holding back Canadians from consuming more milk. We're already consuming twice as much as the world average.
One of the issues that comes up, and I blogged about this the other day, I wondered, okay, to my Twitter followers, those who read my blog, what are you paying for a liter of milk, 3 liters of milk, etc.? Got a range of response. A lot of people near the U.S. border saying it's cheaper at the Costco in Buffalo or wherever it might be. Wayne Easter, who of course you sure know, he's an MP, former farmer himself. He's in Asia right now, and he's saying actually a liter of milk in New Zealand and in Australia is 10 cents more than a liter of milk is in Canada. But what do you say to consumers? You probably heard from them saying, I'm paying too much for milk here in Canada. I ought to be able to get cheaper milk.
Mm-hmm. Well, the New Zealand government had an inquiry about milk prices in that country because the farmers get paid less than many other countries, and consumers were paying more. So that's another reason why not to adopt that model. There were some comparisons, of course, between the U.S. and the Canadian price, and you got to make sure that you're comparing apples to apples. So in Canada, we only pay once for our dairy products at the checkout counter. In the U.S., you pay twice. You pay at the checkout counter and again at tax time. And we had a trade expert, Peter Clark, from right here in town, do a study, and he found that the level of subsidies, hidden and openly visible, is equivalent to about 31 cents a liter. So when you're doing your comparisons between Canada and U.S., you've got to add 31 cents a liter to the U.S. price because that's what's being provided in terms of subsidies. And then you have an apples to apples comparison.
Ron Versteeg, thank you so much for dropping in. And I know there's more at your website, Dairy Farmers of Canada. You Google that, and there's a whole chunk on.
Our Facebook page as well, yourmilk.ca.
Yourmilk.ca, yes, where you can go head to head with the Restaurant and Food Association who take a different view. But listen, thank you so much for coming in. I very much appreciate it.